Psychedelic Sundays. Psychedelic Sundays. Psychedelic Sundays.
Psychedelics are re-emerging into public awareness in a big way. Scientific studies that were once taboo or illegal are now being performed and shared around the world. These studies show that most psychedelics are not only safe and non-habit forming, but also have incredible healing potential when used in a proper context. Entheogens have long been used as catalysts for spiritual and visionary experiences. Many of these, which people report in shamanic journeys, show similarities to those described by Jung in his explorations of human psyche. It could be argued that shamanism, a Jungian analysis, are concerned with what shamans call soul loss or soul retrieval, what Jung might call withdrawal of projections towards individuation. Entheogens have been and are being used in shamanic practice as catalysts for exploring inner psychic realities. These two systems are complementary and mutually enhancing in the process of individuation, which ultimately helps us reconnect to our deepest nature. Entheogens are unique technology that shape and are shaped by the unique social and cultural conditions. Jung had it right that we should live part of our life internally. We should do deep self-exploration, which also means transformation, and then combine somehow in our everyday life the deep knowledge and wisdom that could come from these states. The transpersonal experience revealing the earth as an intelligent, conscious entity.
Welcome to the second part of our Entheogens show with Adam, Carolina, and myself, Satori D. Enjoy. That you said that and it just sparked that in me. But to wrap things up, I think I wanted to do it in the beginning, but we just kind of started going and just started flowing. But our personal tales with the plant teachers are a significant experience with the psychedelics that kind of shook us up. Adam kind of mentioned it a little bit, but you want to go a little bit more specific story of yours that helped you on your own journey?
Yeah, I mean, I've used different entheogens at different times in my life. I'll be honest, lately I don't use them a lot anymore. I'm more of once you get the message, you can hang up the phone type of space with regards to those things in my life these days. But, the most recent experience I had with them was in the summer of 2015. I had been pretty depressed, to be honest. I had gone through a divorce about a year and a half before, and I just wasn't in a great mind space. My mind was replaying all kinds of things that could have been different and whatnot, and I did a pretty small dose of mushrooms, probably less than a gram, and I went to go see a Primus show, and I spent most of the show puking in the bathroom, and I wasn't quite sure why, because I wasn't really tripping, and I didn't eat a lot of the mushrooms, and I hadn't eaten, it wasn't from the food I had eaten or anything like that. It felt like a purge, and I wasn't sure how such a small dose brought that purge on. But at the end of the show, when I went home and I was looking up at the sky for a bit, and it was just beautiful, and I went to bed. And then the next day I woke up and I was a new person. My brain was reset. I wasn't depressed anymore. I wasn't going over the same thought patterns I had been for months about what could have been different and what could have changed, or what I could have done to make things different and whatever. And all that repetitive thinking went away just magically. It was amazing. It was a cure for depression for me. It totally was in that case. And that's the most recent experience I had. with these types of things. And for me, I think that's where I get this attitude of the science and actually using it for depression, like they're studying it for. I mean, the stuff works. Now we just have to prove it in a scientific way so that it can become accessible to more people. Because I don't want to be stuck on benzodiazepines every day. God, don't prescribe me Xanax. Let me take mushrooms once a year, whenever I need to or whatever. To me, that's a much more sane way of dealing with depression if it's something that you live with, than to be prescribed daily doses of pills that are really bad for you. So that's my most recent experience with it.
And it definitely goes back to what you were mentioning before. Now there's, scientific studies that back up your experience with it and how it does help with that. And in college, I gave a speech kind of emphasizing this point of opening up research back on psychedelics. And my main point, one of the main points of the speech was, and I was referencing the Johns Hopkins study, but it's like, why take pills for they surprise you, antidepressants and all these kind of different things for depression or whatever, and you have to stay on them, and then the side effects that happen to it, when you could take one dose of psilocybin mushrooms that lasted you for like a year or two, and some people even said necessary for their whole life if it's done right in the right setting. And it's like, and it's a lower toxicity, and all of the different facts that we now know about it. And now that they're really doing a lot more studies on that, which is immensely interesting to me. Actually, let's Carolina, a personal tale of yours or something that you want to share with us.
Yep, I think that I wanted to tell a little bit of how one of my first psychedelic experiences was, or what I consider it to be the first ever. I know lots of people don't consider weed cannabis as a psychedelic or an entheogen, and I do. I totally consider it to be mind-opening and making the soul visible, just what we were talking. And well, when I was a kid, I had a bunch of depressive and suicidal thoughts and actions, and I didn't really enjoy a lot about myself and about being alone. And I think that developed on me being a teen that was pretty much partying all the time. And now that I see both of those different scenarios, being a kid and being suicidal and depressive, and then a teen partying all the time, just knocking myself with alcohol until I could black out. Both scenarios are both of them took me to numbness, and I think that's what I was looking for. For some reason, I don't know if I was scared about getting to know myself, and then when I was in college and I started smoking weed socially, that helped me a lot to get loose and feel comfortable. And these years of my life helped me a lot in stopping to hate on myself. And that's when I started to enjoy more about sharing with others who I was. And little by little, I started getting to know myself more. And then the first time that I ate cannabis by myself with some happy cookies that a friend gave me, this was the first time that I was alone having a psychedelic at home. I started cleaning my room. I put to some music. I listened to Radiohead's Kid A album. And I started to pamper myself, stretch a little. I first started to feel in a comfortable situation with my body, feeling warmer, stretched out. And then I started drawing, and this was the first time that I ever did my dots and eyes drawings. That is what I do now. And this is where I started drawing all of these things that look like microscopic organisms. And little by little, I started thinking about how the molecular world is so similar to the universe and so similar to the cosmos in images. And that's when my consciousness expanding trip started, and that's how things have been going in all these years. I will always remember that night as the night that I started to love myself, and that was very interesting. That I also started doing these drawings that are my entheogens nowadays. Just like Adam was saying, nowadays I don't really use entheogens besides doing yoga and drawing. And just like you, I feel that maybe 2014 was the year that I did more psychedelics, and my latest trips were just telling me I want to be sober. I want to be back into 3D reality and thinking soberly and doing things soberly, because I feel that my journey with entheogens has been making me fall in love with nature from day one. So hopefully I never wanted to stay in a trip for too much time, and that's why I never kind of abused psychedelics. But I understand how anyone can fall into patterns in the ones we want to, get a one up and keep on a high situation or a more consciousness open situation. And that's why I also feel it's quite important that nowadays we have all these different integration organizations. And I know I drift off theme there a little, but that could be interesting to touch on too.
Oh yeah, no problem. Very similar to you guys too, and probably why we all attracted each other today in this moment and in this time. Very similar experience of my own development. Me too, even though I do a lot of playing with images of psychedelics and this and that. I think last year I took mescaline, a small, I didn't necessarily take a lot, but I took just a little bit, kind of similar to Adam's experience of a small dose, and just kind of had a purge and then kind of clean my hard drive of my mind a little bit. But prior to that, I think it was 4 years since I taken mushrooms. And I think I'll go into very similar stories about how in my younger years, about what you were saying too, of the numbing and not wanting to face myself, I guess, in a sense. Part of what you were saying too is what I learned in a hard way, is that I used to sell mushrooms, so I had access to mushrooms a lot. And there's part of me knew that they were sacred and that they were important and not to abuse them. But I felt like I was this ambassador of them, so I was always telling my friends about them, and I never really even made any money off of them. It was more giving them to my friends and them cutting the cost. But I would have the mushrooms and people will buy them, and then they say, "Oh, but we want to take them with you." And I'll be like, "Oh, I just took them last week." I was like, I shouldn't take them again. And I was like, they're like, "No, but we want to do them with someone that kind of knows what they're doing," and they kind of talk me into it. And I was like, "You know what? Let's just do it. Let's do it." And so there was this one summer where I did them a lot. And what I found out is that I've heard that phrase by Alan Watts, once you get the message, hang up the phone. But I have to learn stuff the hard way. And so what I've realized, that if you have nothing to process as far as this deep work that you need to do, that you really don't trip. I did it, and I think physiologically too, that I found out later, do some research, it takes 5 days for you to be able to physically do it again. Say if you take the mushrooms one day and then 2 days later you take them again and you take the same dose or even a higher dose, you're not gonna have a classic experience with them. But anyways, so that's something I learned on my own. But I think I just, for whatever, in that moment of time, I was ambassador of the mushroom, and I was giving it to everybody that would listen, and it kept on telling me to take it with people. And so then later I kind of, once that period was over, I never really I got like the message, and I had a hard time integrating certain aspects of it, of kind of like what it was really telling me, or what my own path of heart was. But I would stop searching for them, and it's kind of like, I think Terrence McKenna kind of said this one time, that when they're ready, they'll find you, kind of thing. And you kind of mentioned it with DMT, but for me, it was like the mushrooms. And I would always say, "Oh, it's a psychedelic summer," because I wouldn't like go and search for them, even like mention them. I would just do my own thing, work, and all this kind of stuff. But out of the blue, someone said, "Hey, Daniel, I have a connection with mushrooms. You want to take some, blah, 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 this and that." And so like, it was like this ritual thing for like the next 4 years after my big experience with them. And I would take them every like summer, and we'll go, and it became more ritualistic, and I had my own little ritual that I would do with them, and my own little setup, and even telling my friends, like, if we're gonna do it, let's do it right. We had a camping spot. I like to be out in nature, like make sure that we're not gonna get disturbed by anybody. I even would tell my friends, monitor your dreams, make sure that you're cool within your own mind. I think a good gauge for anybody that's listening later or listening now, I think for me, my own personal experience, to be aware of what you're going through. And a simple way to do that is, and I don't know, not everybody pays attention to the dreams, but a very practical, easy way is to simply gauge your dreams. And if you're going through, let's say, very negative dreams that are repeating, then there's some work that needs to be done, and maybe just bring it up to light. And you can work it through via the trip, if that's the trip you kind of want to have. Part of the big thing is listening to yourself, and being with people that you're comfortable with, in an environment that you're comfortable with. And I think that's why these sacred spaces are important to make, and you don't always have the luxury of that. And one of the last times I took mushrooms, which is a very deep and personal experience that I had, it was around this time of chaos. My grandfather, who I was pretty close with, was dying at this time. He didn't die yet, but my mom had to go to Texas to go visit him. He was in the hospital, he had a heart attack, and it was really bad. And I had, very similar to Adam, I had a lot of stuff that was going through my head, and I couldn't normally, my writing a poem or doing some meditation and going for a run or these normal yogas that I kind of do wasn't necessarily working. I couldn't even focus on that. Ooh, the mushroom found me. I didn't ask anybody for mushrooms. Someone just called me up and told me, my friend told me, "Hey, I have an extra eighth of mushrooms. Do you want to buy it?" And I was like, my first instinct was no, but my new practice was like, oh, if it's calling me, go for it. And so I went and I bought it. I was like, I don't know if this is a good time to do it. And I said, you know what? So I sat down and kind of did my little ritual. And what I kind of do is I prep myself and I roll blunts, and I kind of set some music. It's usually like Pink Floyd or King Crimson. I kind of do a little inventory. Okay, what are some things that are really bothering me? And for instance, that was this whole issue with my grandpa, and trying to wrap my head around him leaving and him gonna die. And so I did my little thing of my inventory, and I was a little scared, but I was also too knowing that I believe that the mushroom is my ally, and that sometimes you got to take that leap of faith. And so I did, and it was a really intense experience. The portion of the experience was that I was in a fetal position, and I expressed it as it seems like some cosmic entity was needing my consciousness, and that I was like this cosmic embryo. And Standard Graph kind of goes through this in his breathing exercises, talking about the life and death rebirth kind of thing. And then I instantly had this continuum of connection of a continuum of life, and that I was connected through all life, through my own spark of consciousness, and everybody's sparks of consciousness in this net of Indra, and that my grandpa's spark was transitioning through this portion, going back to the source, and that I'm going to miss him, but that it's something beautiful connects us through this continuum of everything, and that sometimes beauty and life hurts, but that's also what makes it great. And so I went through that experience, and sure enough, the next day in the morning I felt a lot better, a little bit more composed and not prone to do let's say numbing stuff. But my mom called me and said Grandpa passed away last night, and I was like, oh yeah. And I intuitively knew that during that moment that I was having that life-death, tapping into the life-death archetype that I unlocked through my mushroom, the plant teacher, the mushroom teaching me this archetype, this truth of life, and it was just amazing because it helped me to go through that next week of when I went to Texas and we went through the funeral, and my aunts and uncles, and especially my aunts and uncles, weren't processing it right, and there was a lot of drama that happened, and it was kind of like, I didn't know it at the time, but that I kind of needed to process that so that I could weather the storm of emotions and tribulations that was going to unfold with my family. And it was a very sacred experience that I had, and something that I don't necessarily, it's not a story that I never shared on a podcast, but a story that I don't necessarily share with anybody. But I think it's also important in the right set and setting to share something that deep with people, to hold on to these eternal truths and to express them. And for me, it's trying to find a way to express, let's say, that story in a better way. But that's why I think I gravitate to your guys' work, because you put that in your artwork. I guess this goes into that integration process. The integration process is, there are probably guidelines for this, and I think what the work that MAPS and other groups that are doing help with that. But everybody, I think what you learn, you take your own flavor and your own personality in it, and you use the bare bones of, let's say, like the grieving process, the set and setting stuff, and you make it your own. And I think we all have our own ways. Like I said, I learned that through traumatic experience, that one way that I help integrate and process, just beyond psychedelics, so just life in general, is writing poetry, is doing these breathing exercises, kind of fasting a little bit. And those are like my go-to things. For you guys, it's probably different. And I guess anybody want to touch on their own kind of like process, ritual, integration? And it doesn't necessarily have to be psychedelics, just in general. I think it could all be applied to.
Hey Satori, thank you so much for sharing that story. I didn't know you had it shared before, and that made it even more special than it was. I think, yeah, what you said, I realized we were talking more about, we can all get so excited about where we're going as a society with psychedelics and what's the future. And it's also so important to have spaces in the ones we share stories. I remember there's this event called Symposium, in the one, as far as I know, they started being more of a platform for people to share their own stories, and now they've opened up a little bit more discussion on stories about perspective of, the emerging science and the social issues that are happening with psychedelics and drug policy nowadays. But their main thing has always been having people and being a platform for people to share their stories, which there's not much space for that, as we all know. I'm also very intrigued on what you guys think about this other entheogens, or if you even consider these other things as entheogens. I'm talking more of the sensory deprivation tanks, or even meditation, yoga, Reiki, or let's see, Bach flowers, crystal work, or even Lucia number 3, this light that is repeated in different patterns that is known for inducing very transpersonal feelings and also relating and connecting someone with meditation and even re-experiencing their birth moment. I consider all these other tools to also be entheogens at the end of the day. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's other ways to reach that knowledge. For me personally, I can't comment on how well all those other methods work if you haven't already had an experience with mushrooms or ayahuasca or acid or something like that. For me personally, I never was able to access that type of consciousness without psychedelics until after I'd had a psychedelic experience. Once I'd had that type of experience, I was able to I guess know where I'm going. Like if I meditate, it's like I kind of, okay, now I know where the end goal is, what I'm trying to accomplish by meditating. You know, when I used to try and meditate before I'd had a psychedelic experience, I would just fall asleep. I mean, it was useless to me. I didn't understand it. And after having had the psychedelic experience, definitely there's other ways that I get there. Often when I'm playing music, I'll get there. Like I'll just disappear and it's just me vibrating with the music and there's no consciousness trying to decide what to do next. And the same thing when I'm painting, you know, if I'm in the act of creating and I don't question what I'm about to do, it just happens. And that's when I'm in that flow state. It's similar to being under the experience of or under the influence of a psychedelic or entheogen or whatever word we're using for right now. But yeah, there's, I think, different strokes for different folks. I think the main way to measure those things isn't, and I'm not maybe saying measure isn't necessarily scientific, this type of measurement, but how do you change your life after you have one of those experiences? Do you change things in your life? If you don't, then I would argue that maybe the message here or the experiences you're having aren't quote unquote, real entheogenic experiences. If you have those experiences and they make you question things and rearrange your life a bit, then yeah, they're more real. But again, everybody is different. Everybody has their own perception, their own way of explaining experiences to themselves and how they're gonna take an experience and translate it into the way they behave. So, for me personally, I think that it's definitely possible to reach that state of mind for me now. But if I hadn't had a psychedelic experience, I don't know how much meditation or even music or whatever would really get me there.
This makes me think a lot of what we were saying earlier about words and how this quote, when you name me, you negate me. Maybe if we are, we don't know what other dimensions look like and we don't have words, or we haven't we are just not so familiar with our own consciousness. Maybe that's why it's more difficult for us to access all this other realms that psychedelics open their doors for us too. And I agree with you. I come from the same place. I've never been able to reach the same states I've reached with mushrooms or acid or other stuff before with either meditation or music or whatever. But after trying psychedelics, it's like the words were broken for me. Like the ideas stopped being very descriptive and now new doors were open. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I definitely do kind of prefer what you guys are saying. And for me, you have to have that frame of reference. And I don't know if it's necessarily because of our time and place right now as far as society, and that we have lost, let's say, the true meaning of certain words. So we kind of have negated it or got cut off from it. But it is my suspicion that this state that we're all talking about, the mystical experience, the divine within, is always there. William Blake said, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, the world will appear man as it is, infinite. To see the world in a grain of sand and eternity in an hour, and hold infinity in your hand." That even in the Bible, you quote the Bible, and it tells you that the kingdom of heaven dwells within you, and that's what the word Gnostic means, and we kind of lost it in our own Western culture of learning that the divine spark within. And I think once you have that frame of reference, but I would also say this too, that just because you take in a psychedelic doesn't necessarily mean you have had a mystical experience. And I think, the reverse is true too. If it's not coupled in with this material of your own inner working for it to be there to that place, and the proof is in the work of what happens, what unfolds afterwards. Of does it stay with you, help you to heal yourself, or transform you, or help you on your journey? Because I have had pretty taking acid at a music festival, which was fun, and I saw things move, and the moon looked like a chandelier, and it was really fun. But it had no deep meaning as these other different experiences I had in a different setting. And even having that experience, the hard work comes afterwards of the integration of you working it. So I think coupled with these other techniques of meditation or yoga, or even I think one of the most powerful ways of integration is through artwork and a whole array of whatever artwork that means. Alex Gray talks about the role of visionary art, of integrating that mystical experience and expressing it out into the world and creating these things with it. And I know, because I have my go-to story about this kind of subject is a tale of two visions. So at this point in my life, I had a bunch of different shroom experiences, and they were all fun, and I had probably some insight, but I really didn't know. This is communing with Gaia experience, but I was reading a lot of Zen philosophy and reading Jack Kerouac and his book of Dharma, and getting really into Eastern philosophy and practicing meditation and doing yoga. And I read the story about Buddha, and I said, surely what I have experienced on shrooms is not the enlightened experience that the Buddha is talking about. So what the Buddha did was he sat underneath a tree and fasted and didn't eat anything, right? And so I said, you know what? I'm determined to have this enlightenment experience of the Buddha. And I was gun-ho about this. I am going to fast and sit underneath a tree until I pass out or I have the Buddha experience. So day one, I drank water and I sat and I meditated. And the first day, oh man, my mind was racing. I couldn't focus. I was antsy. Man, this is not going to work. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to be able to sit here and wait for enlightenment and fast. And I said, you know what? I gave myself kind of a break. I would take little breaks from it and then build myself up to it. So the next day was a little easier. I had a little bit less mind chatter. I was sitting and I was getting peaceful and I was feeling good and I was kind of getting into a groove, but I still was no mystical experience, just really relaxed and really centered. And I'm like, okay, so the next day I was getting a little bit more fatigued because I've only had water for the past 2 days and very little sleep, but a lot of meditation. And now I'm kind of like in the zone a little bit, per se, that I could stop my mind chatter and just feeling the breeze, the wind, really immersed in the direct experience of everything. And I was like, okay. And something in me called to me and said, it's time. And what that meant, it didn't necessarily get formed in words later. Now I'm expressing it in words. But for me, I sat down, I laid down and had my hands across my chest and kind of went in this position with my eyes closed, and I let go. And my experience was that I viewed myself in third person. Then I viewed my yard. I was just like awareness, and then I viewed my house, then I viewed my neighborhood, then I viewed my city, then I viewed the United States, then I viewed the earth, and then I was out in space, and then I was focusing on this light, and I was going towards this light, and then I got stopped, and I was like, oh, the light's so nice and pretty, and I was going to go to the light, and then something stopped me, and then I got kicked back into my body, and then my experience after I came back to my body was this tingling, like the tingling you get when your leg falls asleep. Like, whoa, okay, I finally got a mystical experience via no psychedelics. The only thing I had was water and meditating for 3 days, and I got there, and I was like, oh my god, like, did I just like leave my body? Or like, I was very disoriented. I was like, I need to get something to eat, and like now, like, I don't know what to do with that. And this is I was very early in on my journey. But that same feeling, that same place, and I have got there via doing dream work. I used to do Toltec dreaming, meditation, psychedelics. I haven't done sensory deprivation, isolation tank, but I heard those work really well. And some of the other stuff. But it's my suspicion that if you had that frame of reference, but coupled too with doing some work of these techniques, these ancient techniques, and even modern techniques, I know that William S. Burroughs created the dream machine, and it's very similar to what you were saying about the flashing of the lights and to induce these altered states. And that part of too, I think, from my own experience of filtering out a lot of this stuff, of one of the greatest things that I've gotten, my research is this Tibetan saying, and it says, if you see something beautiful in heaven, don't cling. If you see something of hell and horror, don't cling. And part of that is to filter out your own projections to get to the essence of something. It kind of goes back to what I was saying about those Zen stories, that there's all these different techniques and paths and roads, but once this has been here all the time, and that it doesn't necessarily matter what the colors or the pictures or techniques or words that were said that induce this, but that it's there, it's eternal. It has always been there. Oh, okay, that's what it is. And it's kind of like yourself winking back at you. I don't know. But yeah, that's my little spill on that.
Nice, thanks for sharing that. That's that brought me back. I remember one specific time I was playing guitar, and I went into another world. It was I became an Indian on the back of a horse in the plains hunting buffalo, and what I was playing on the guitar was going along with the horse's gallop, and it was just magical. It was I don't know even how to explain it. I wasn't high. I was just in another world, and it was beautiful. It felt like maybe I had connected with a past life or something like that. I couldn't really explain it, but while it was happening, it was magical, and it kind of like when it was over and I realized what had happened and how real it was and how it happened without any other substances. It kind of opened my mind to the possibility that people can have deep spiritual experiences without ingesting a psychedelic or an entheogen. So I guess that was one of the times that I can remember that I had an experience like that.
Yeah, Carolina, I guess any deeper of your own experience was I guess mystical experience, non psychedelic path?
Yes, well, going to the Peruvian jungle since I was very young. Both my dad's and my mom's family are from the jungle. My grandparents used to live there when they were alive, so we would go visit them all the time. And later in life, my dad moved back there. We could be traveling around the jungle or just in a lake, but the people offering you to be part of an ayahuasca ceremony has been always there. It was a daily question, pretty much. And I always said no. Nowadays, I can understand why. I wasn't ready. I was younger. There's been lots of things that I've learned since that time. But once me and my sister did participate of a Temazcal ceremony, which is Temazcal is usually from Central America, more from Mexico and Guatemala. But they were holding a session in Tarapoto, which is this place where my dad is from, in the jungle in Peru. And the Temazcal is pretty much like a hot teepee. It's a hot space made out of, just like an igloo, but made out of soil. So it keeps very hot inside the cave, as I would call it. It was our shaman and my sister and I and 3 other persons. There were no psychedelic plants. They were only some very, very, very hot rocks. They had been heating up for 2 or 3 days. And right in the moment where the ceremony started, the rocks, the stones, the very hot stones are put inside the cave, and lots of cleansing plants are held in, and they are washed and then thrown against the stones. So all the plant would become smoke, and then you would just inhale it. None of these were psychedelic. None of these caused any hallucinogens or any kind of trips. They were used more for cleansing, like eucalyptus or palo santo. It was more of a cleansing plant, or sage. And it was just the shaman and his ícaros, which are his songs, and his words, his meditation, guide us through what he would call 4 different doors, from our skin into the deepest part of going past our body and going to the center of the earth. And that was pretty interesting and overwhelming. There were no psychedelic plants being used. It was only the cleansing air, the very, very hot feeling around us, sweating like crazy, and just going through our mind, and all these images start appearing in my head, and I traveled through all these doors, and it was quite cleansing and pretty interesting, as everything was just held because of meditation. This was in 2011, I think.
Well, awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of I think one concept that I find interesting and truer is Rupert Sheldrake. He has this concept called morphogenetic resonance, and he talks about how just that our notion, the common notion of information and how it travels and how it's stored and embedded is not doesn't seem necessarily how information is actually stored in. And I think one story to illustrate this is something that I heard at a psychedelic conference like 10 years ago that I went to. And this is kind of before I even was into the newer research of what's going on with maps and this and that. I went to this art gallery by my house, and they were having this show, and they had this conference early in the morning, and I made my girlfriend at the time go, and I'm glad I went because they shared the story of this people research with LSD. So they had Monsanto's LSD, and they were going to the jungles, and they're gonna trade or kind of develop this relationship so they get ayahuasca from the shamans down there, and they're kind of gonna trade or give them a gift, try to build this relationship. Oh, here's our plant, or here's our medicine, like kind of like, what's your medicine? And so they had this whole kind of process, and they said that when they gave the shamans the LSD and they had the experience of the ayahuasca, they asked them, they wanted to see what their input was of it, and they said, oh, it's pretty powerful, it's nice, but it's just weird. You know, this is through an interpreter. And they said, what do you mean by that? And it says, well, we just didn't understand what it was trying to tell us. And I said, what did you guys see, or what was your experience? And they describe a factory of people in white smocks with masks and a conveyor belt. Basically, they describe the manufacturing process of LSD, the Monsanto's lab of where they make the LSD, and they were describing that. They necessarily didn't have the right words because they don't have that frame of reference, but the way they were describing it, and the scientists were like, dude, that's what they're describing. They don't necessarily, they have no frame of reference of it, but they're saying strange people wearing all white, this large space, it looked all clean, and describing like concrete and like this box and everything. And then they're like, that's weird. And so part of that is why I think the plants, in my sense, and from what I have experienced, have a deeper, rich knowledge to them because they have of information that gets stored on them every time someone takes ayahuasca or takes mushrooms or takes peyote, that they have this whole lineage of people inserting this adding to that field of knowledge. But I think also too, information is embedded in environments, and that's why I think it's important to get back these sacred places, and that your pictures to embed your emotions and your feelings and those music and artwork, and that if you tune yourself right, you get access to that. And then the greater access is the access to all that information. And that kind of goes into what I shared, my experience of the cosmic embryo experience that I had. And a few other times I have reached, it seems like I reached that place, whether it's the void, or there's so many different words that describe it. But if you've had that frame of reference, it doesn't matter, the void, the white light, the darkness, the every wind, the dream time, whatever it is, you're like, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about that place where the birth of words, like all the creation stories kind of start in the void, and the word was spoken in the light, meaning that the light comes out, and then this kind of everything happens. And for me, using modern words and how they negate or they collapse, because you give an attention to this ocean of possibilities of the actual state of the deep reality is a maybe state of potentiality, this ocean of potentiality. And the minute you speak something, or the minute that we frame things in words and artifacts, that they collapse into this, into a tree, into this and that, because we have all collectively constructed this world, and then now more we're constructing it with words, and we have closed ourselves off to the beauty of that essence, of that potentiality, of that everything, of that access to that information of our whole lineage as humanity, and even deeper, the whole lineage of life since the beginning, and that we're part of this dance of eternity, these songs of eternity. And I mean, you can't, and nor should you live always in that state, but to hold on to that truth, because that truth is always here. And then when you see it in other places, you can't help but smile, because it's kind of glimmering and glistening to you. I have the same experience that Adam is talking about, and it reminds me of the first couple of times, or the onset of my mushroom trips, where I have this tingling, this kind of like antsiness. But it's the same experience I have when I hear beautiful music, or I see really good art, or I have an experience where I sometimes in the morning when there's no noise, I hear the birds chirping or the wind blowing, and I get that goosebumps, like your hair's tingling, and you're just like, oh, that's that connection to everything. And it's maybe not represented in a crazy visual, but that feeling is this very similar and the same in my experience of it to all of this. And I think the more we do our visionary work, and the more we talk, and the more we commune with each other, the more we can expand that frame of reference for other people. And I think that's why I have this desire to do these events. I hopefully will want to do another one of this, maybe in a month or whatever. And if you guys can't make it or whatever, but hopefully we kind of expand this, and it's our own virtual sacred place where we come and share stories, and whatever happens in our safe space, and then I edit it and we make these little things. But it could be training ground for when we do have our own nodes of this space. Adam over there in Canada, me here in LA, and hopefully, however it unfolds, that we we turn this magic that we have right here into physical events, and that's my not so secret desire anymore. Equalizing it, but yeah, Adam.
I like that a lot. You know, that's for me tonight. I think that's the biggest motivation, inspiration that I got. First of all, I'm really grateful that Minds brought us together. I think that Minds as a platform deserves a little bit of a shout out here in this conversation, because that's where I connected with you. And I don't know about you, but for me, Minds has given me a renewed hope with regards to being able to make these type of things happen, without censorship, and to be able to connect to people. I'm really grateful for the platform of Minds for offering that to whoever needs it. So that's one thing I just wanted to mention, that how awesome I think Minds is as a platform. But definitely, I feel inspired to put something on a calendar, man, and just invite people, whoever may find, create an event on Facebook or whatever. Just whoever finds it, and like Alex and Allison said, even if 2 or 3 people show up, that's 2 or 3 people that aren't showing up right now, and 2 or 3 people that I'm not connected with right now locally that I could be. And I think that it's super cool that we came together, and I leave with that burning desire to create a little community. And I got to do that. I got to get over my fears, and get over nervousness and shyness and stuff like that. Just go out and do it. And once I do, I know I'll attract the right people and connect with some cool people, and it won't seem so scary once there's a few other people doing it with me.
Heck yeah. Carolina, your final thoughts?
I love that idea, Satori. I feel tonight and the first show that we did together, it's after finishing each of these shows, I'm just thinking, oh, I'm so glad that I did this. And just, sometimes I can get very overwhelmed, and I can dive very deeply in creating my own artwork that it gets kind of difficult sometimes to find the space and time to talk to others about all these things that are so important. Just like Adam was saying, I wish I would start doing my own full moon gatherings here at my studio. But, most of all, the reason why I haven't done them yet is out of shyness and out of thinking, oh, maybe no one will show up. Maybe one person. How awkward will that be? Like 2 of us, what are we? So I just stopped thinking that I'll do it. But I love that Minds is that space. I love that Cosm is that space. Omega is that space. That the Infinite Imaginarium is that space. And, hopefully we'll get it into real life at some point. But I love all these different tools that we have in order to make it happen. I'm pretty sure that we have internet and we can do conversations like these online, and at some point we'll have them in real life. And who knows, maybe in another lifetime we'll have them through the collective consciousness, if we are not already having them there, which I think we are. But I love these spaces, and we should make more of these all the time. It's food for our souls, and it's food for our, it's just fueled so that we can keep on trusting love and trusting the imagination and trusting the energy and just the collective consciousness all together. Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks, both of you guys, for showing up. We started our own little nexus of our mystical experiences, and it's going to be very interesting how it unfolds. Thanks, guys, for your time, and have a great night.